If you remember a time when the world felt closer to home, this story may already feel familiar before it even begins. Back then, life didn't announce itself as meaningful. It just unfolded that way. People weren't trying to preserve moments for later. They were too busy living inside them. And that's why those memories feel different now. They weren't framed, they weren't filtered, they simply happened. For those who grew up in mid-20th century America, daily life didn't come with explanations or labels. You didn't call it simpler times. It was just normal. And because it was normal, it quietly shaped expectations, values, and behavior without ever asking permission. Today, when people look back, they often struggle to explain what made it feel so grounded. It wasn't just the absence of technology, it was the presence of limits. Limits on speed, on access, on distraction. The world felt smaller then, not because opportunities were fewer, but because attention wasn't stretched thin. Most of life happened within a few miles of home. Schools, stores, friends, work, all part of the same orbit. You didn't constantly compare your life to someone hundreds of miles away. You compared it to yesterday, or last week, or last year. That created a sense of continuity that's hard to replicate now. People didn't expect life to entertain them. They expected it to require effort. And because of that, small achievements felt bigger. Fixing something yourself mattered. Showing up on time mattered. Keeping your word mattered. Not because someone was watching, but because that's how the world worked. There was also a shared understanding that life moved forward whether you were ready or not. You learned by doing. You adjusted. You adapted. Nobody paused to ask how you felt about every change. You figured it out as you went. Somehow that built confidence rather than anxiety. This isn't about pretending everything was perfect. It wasn't. But it was cohesive. Pieces of daily life fit together in a way that made sense. And when people say, you just had to be there, what they really mean is that the feeling doesn't translate easily. It has to be remembered. And if this feels familiar, wait until we slow things down even more, because the real difference wasn't what people did back then. It was how time itself behaved. Everyday life once moved to a rhythm that rarely changed. Not because people lacked ambition, but because time wasn't constantly interrupted. Mornings followed predictable patterns. Evenings slowed naturally. And weekends actually felt like breaks, not just delayed obligations. Doors opened and closed at set hours. If you missed them, you waited. There was no workaround. Sundays were quieter, not by rule, but by agreement. Fewer cars, fewer errands, more stillness. That pause wasn't accidental. It was built into the structure of the week, and people learned to respect it. Meals happened at the same time most days. Families gathered not because it was trending advice, but because it was practical. Dinner didn't wait for everyone's schedule to align perfectly. You showed up, or you missed it. And that consistency anchored people in ways they didn't recognize until much later. News arrived once a day, sometimes twice. You weren't expected to react instantly. You absorbed information, talked about it, and then moved on. There was space between events, and that space allowed perspective to form. Because life wasn't constantly demanding attention, people developed patience without realizing it. Waiting wasn't a problem to be solved, it was just part of living. And in that waiting, people learned how to sit with their thoughts, their boredom, and their surroundings. Nothing about this was glamorous, but it was grounding. The repetition of ordinary days gave people a sense of progress without pressure. You didn't feel behind all the time, you felt present. Today, it's hard to recreate that rhythm because modern life doesn't allow silence to last very long. But back then, silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was expected. And it taught people how to listen to themselves and to each other. But time wasn't the only thing moving differently. The objects people lived with every day played a much bigger role than we ever realized. And some of them would be unthinkable now. The things people used every day didn't feel special at the time. That's what made them powerful. Gas cost so little you barely thought about it. Bread didn't require comparison shopping. Kids carried coins, not cards, and that was enough. Phones stayed in one place. If you missed a call, it stayed missed. No voicemail? No follow-up? And because of that, people learned to be where they said they'd be. Reliability wasn't optional, it was expected. Children walked to school, rode bikes across town, disappeared for hours without causing alarm. Not because parents didn't care, but because the world allowed it. And because it allowed it, Kids learned responsibility early, not through lectures, but through experience. Milk showed up in glass bottles. Television signed off at night. When something broke, you fixed it or went without. Replacement wasn't automatic. These weren't charming details. They were practical realities in a world where convenience had limits. Those limits created skills. You learned how things worked because you had to. You learned patience because there was no shortcut. You learned independence because nobody was constantly checking in. What's striking now is how much trust existed by default. Trust in neighbors. Trust in routines. Trust that most people were doing their best. That trust didn't come from ignorance. It came from familiarity. People shared the same spaces, the same schedules, the same expectations. And that shared experience made daily life feel manageable, even when it was hard. But objects alone didn't hold that world together. The real glue was social behavior, the unspoken rules that shaped how people treated each other when no one was keeping score. Communities once operated on understanding rather than instruction. Neighbors noticed when something felt off. Kids belonged to entire blocks, not just households, and adults felt responsible for more than just themselves. If you misbehaved, someone else's parent might correct you and your own parents would back them up. Not because it was harsh, but because accountability was shared. Word traveled fast, and reputation mattered. People borrowed tools and returned them. Disagreements happened face to face. Apologies were expected, not optional. Privacy existed, but so did awareness. That balance created trust. There were social consequences for poor behavior long before legal ones were needed. You didn't want to disappoint people who knew you. And because of that, most people tried not to. This closeness could feel limiting at times. Everyone knew your business. Mistakes were remembered, but it also meant you were seen. You belonged somewhere, whether you thought about it or not. Belonging shaped behavior in quiet ways. It encouraged responsibility. It encouraged restraint. And it created a safety net that didn't rely on systems or screens. So what happened? How did a world built on shared rhythm and responsibility slowly fade without anyone announcing it? Change didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly. Convenience replaced connection. Speed replaced patience. Efficiency replaced familiarity. None of this was malicious. Much of it was helpful. But something subtle was lost along the way. Shared pauses, shared limits, shared experiences. As options multiplied, reliance on others decreased. As communication sped up, reflection slowed down. Life became more flexible, but also more fragmented. People didn't stop caring. They just stopped needing each other in the same ways. And when need disappears, habits change. Older generations aren't mourning technology, they're mourning texture. The feeling that time wasn't always chasing you, so that life didn't require constant reaction. And maybe that's why the memories linger, not as facts, but as feelings that refuse to fade. What people miss isn't just the past, it's the version of themselves that the past allowed them to be. Unmonitored, unhurried, unexplained. Life didn't ask for constant updates. It asked you to show up, do your part, carry responsibility quietly. That simplicity wasn't naive, it was functional. And it shaped resilience in ways we're still trying to understand. Which brings us to the most important question of all. Why do these memories still matter now? These stories aren't about saying the past was better. They're about saying it mattered, and meaning doesn't expire. When shared, these memories offer context, not judgment. They help younger generations understand where certain values came from and why they still resonate. Remembering isn't resistance to progress, it's perspective. Some things are worth carrying forward not because they're old, but because they worked. And the more we remember where we came from, the clearer it becomes why certain feelings still follow us today.